On behalf of the Cook Memorial Library and the Chocorua Lake Conservancy, welcome everyone to Solar Energy 101 and Beneficial Electrification with Ted Vansant. Ted has over 2 decades of experience with solar energy as the founder and president of New England Commercial Solar Services, NECSS. NECSS is a New Hampshire company that provides low-cost solar construction and financing services to commercial, municipal, nonprofit, and educational clients throughout New England. Ted believes that every solar panel that is installed helps address climate change through lower emissions and by helping the general public see clean energy. This belief drives the business toward greater educational outreach, including NECSS's Solar on Schools program. Other new initiatives include helping customers become net zero with solar PV, heat pumps, and vehicle chargers. Ted currently serves as chair of Clean Energy New Hampshire's Solar Working Group and is the former chair of Clean Energy New Hampshire. Ted and his family enjoy lots of free solar energy at their home from their solar hot water and solar PV systems, and they look forward to having an all-electric vehicle soon. Welcome, Ted. Thank you so much for being here to speak to us.
What I like to start out with in the Solar 101 is to describe how there's 2 common ways of collecting solar energy. One is solar thermal, and a good example of that is if you put your garden hose out on the lawn and the sun hits it, you get free hot water for a few seconds. You could expand upon that if you had a swimming pool, and you could put a giant coil of black pipe rolled up in your lawn and fill it with water and circulate that through your pool, and that would be a really inexpensive solar thermal hot water heater for your pool. But we've become more sophisticated in that, and many of you, including myself, probably have either seen or have a solar hot water system at your house. And the concept is pretty simple. You run liquid through collector panels on your roof, which have little tubes in them. The sun hits the panels, heats that liquid up, and then that hot water is stored in your solar hot water tank and used for your domestic hot water needs. And that reduces the amount of electricity or oil or propane you use to heat your hot water. So that method of collecting solar energy has gone a little bit by the wayside for a number of reasons, one of which is that solar electric generation has become much less expensive. And at the same time, solar hot water, you need a bunch of copper pipes and all that equipment. The cost of that just keeps going up. And so what's happened with the lowering cost of solar electric and the consistent price of solar hot water, solar hot water doesn't make as much financial sense anymore. So therefore, not many people are installing it anymore, and not many people at all are servicing it anymore. So for all intents and purposes, most 99% of solar that's installed, certainly in New Hampshire, is going to be solar electric. So that's what I'm going to focus my talk on. Solar electric is very different. You're not collecting heat from the sun, you're generating electricity from the sun, and the technology is completely different. So it's nice, I think, to start out by understanding that it's 2 separate technologies. So key terms for solar energy: photovoltaic, it technically is relating to the production of electric current at the junction of 2 substances exposed to light. I'm going to show you a diagram that's going to explain it much more simply than that in a few seconds. But photovoltaic panels or array is made up of a few things. It starts with a PV cell, which is about it's on the left there, about 6 by 6 inches. It's very thin piece of silicon, which is a semiconductor. And those have little wires coming off of them and are all connected together with little wires, and those get arranged into a solar panel, which there's probably 64 little solar cells on that panel, And then wires come off of that solar panel, and we connect those wires in series to make a solar array. And so you've got a cell building up to be a PV module, building up to be a PV array. Some other important terms are power versus energy. Power, and it's sorry to take you back to science class, but it's kind of important. So power is instantaneous. It's how much power is being generated at any one time. So if a solar energy system is 1 kW, it's 1,000 watts. That means at any one time it's producing 1,000 watts. But to energy is when you produce that energy over time. So if you produce that 1,000 watts for an hour, you get 1,000 watt hours or a kilowatt hour. And you'll notice on your electric bills at home that you pay for the cost of kilowatt hours, not power. And so a solar energy system that's 1,000 watts will generate about 1,200 kilowatt hours of energy every year. And that's based on the amount of sunshine that we get throughout the year and throughout the day. And that's based on not only actual systems that we've installed, but also, we use 30-year weather data to kind of calculate that. So this is a diagram showing a cross section of a solar PV cell. And the concept, without getting too detailed, is that one side of the PV cell is positively charged and the other side is negatively charged. And when the sun shines on the electrons, they get excited and want to travel from the positive side to the negative side. And as they're traveling in that current, we collect that current on a little wire that, again, connects all those little PV cells together. And that's connected to a little junction box at the back of the PV panel. And then that energy, as it's flowing, will flow out of the PV panel, out of the wire to produce DC current. So on the grander scale, on the system scale, you've got the PV panels all connected together, sitting on your roof, and they're producing this DC current. But we don't use DC direct current in our homes. We use alternating current. So we need a thing called an inverter to convert the DC current to the alternating current. And so your solar panels are connected to that inverter, and then the inverter connects into your electrical panel in your home, and the energy is fed into your electrical panel. Now, almost all systems, solar electric energy systems that are installed in New Hampshire are use what's called net metering. And what net metering is, it allows you to buy from your utility when you need to buy from your utility, and to sell back to the utility when you're you're generating more energy than you're using. So an example of that is during the day, let's call it a weekday, everyone's out at school or work and you're not using any energy at home, but it's a sunny day, you're going to send power back to the grid, and your meter's going to register all those kilowatt hours that you sent out to the grid. So you get credit for that. And then at nighttime, when the sun goes down, you're not going to be producing any energy, so you're going to be buying power back in from the grid. That's the orange arrow pulling power back in. And so on a daily basis, you're kind of pushing some out and pulling some back. And at the end of the month, what you have is a bill that has less kilowatt hours than you would have had because you used a lot of it as it was being generated. And you might have some credits because well, for instance, in the summertime, you're going to generate a lot more electricity because there's more sun. So you may build up credits every month on your electric bill in the summertime, but then in the wintertime, you're going to generate a lot less, so you're going to use up those credits. And typically how we size a system for your home, if you want to do 100%, is we'll calculate how many kilowatt hours you use, and then design a system that'll generate that amount. And so at the end of the month, end of the month, you may have a credit or not, but that credit will flow over to the next month and then the next month, and at the end of the year, you'll be at about a zero. That's called net metering. It's very important. So the other point I wanted to make on this slide is that notice there's no battery in this system. And people probably know a little bit about solar, and they've heard more about batteries and storage and how they're going to be a critical part of the grid, which I'll talk about later, but they're also becoming more popular. So because of net metering, you don't need a battery. The grid is essentially your battery. Any extra energy you send out, you store in the grid. And anytime you need energy, you pull in from the grid. So if you were in an off-grid home, then you'd need to rely totally on your batteries. And during the day, you'd charge them up, and at night you'd use them. But most people are not off-grid. So most people don't need or don't have battery storage, but it's becoming more popular as a backup power mechanism. And so the pricing is getting better, the technology is getting better. I suspect we'll see more and more storage for residential. Currently, we don't, our power rates aren't structured to take advantage of batteries. And so that's one reason that we haven't seen it yet. And at some point that may change. But currently, most systems are installed without batteries. So a little bit, just take a step back to the broader picture. The grid is, the electric grid. And so this is a great image because it kind of shows where we are now and where we're headed in what we call the smart grid. In the middle there is those big electric wire towers, and that allows power to flow from the solar power plant, the wind power plant, the hydro power plant, the nuclear power plant, and the thermal power plant. They're all pushing power into the grid. Then on the other side, there's a bunch of homes and businesses that are using power, but some of those also generate power. So they're pushing power out sometimes, and they're pulling power in sometimes. And so as we get more and more what we call distributed generation with solar on a whole bunch of roofs and solar farms here and there, like we've seen in a lot of states and in some cases in New Hampshire, we've got what's called distributed generation. And so what is really needed and what's being worked on now is what's called the smart grid. And so the grid operators, ISO New England, have to figure out how to manage power in and power out. The other important part of this is as we, to fight climate change, we want to reduce fossil fuel electric generation. So we're increasing our solar and wind energy production. But solar and wind are both not constant sources of energy. So as we increase them, we're going to need to have more energy storage so that if the solar generates all day long, we need to store that up so that we can use it at night, because the traditional old style brown power and nuclear power, even hydropower, allows for consistent production of energy. And so the increase of solar and wind power is going to require us to store more energy, because sometimes the wind doesn't blow and sometimes the sun doesn't shine. So we're going to need storage for that. And that's a whole other topic, but I wanted to touch on that a little bit. So a couple examples. I'm starting with the Effingham Elementary School, which is probably nearby to most of the people on this call in some way. This is a project that is it's mounted on the ground. It's using an area that the school didn't have any plans for or any need for. Son had some scrub trees on it, so we cut the scrub trees down and we built a fence around it and we put up a bunch of rows of solar panels, shown on the right there. On the left, you can see how we've got a bunch of inverters mounted on the back of the array, and a certain number of each one of the panels in each one of those rows will feed one of those inverters, and together all those inverters are combined into a bigger combiner panel, and then that wire from that big combiner panel goes underground to the school and interconnects with the school. Now, this system is about 140 kilowatts or 140,000 watts, and it generates about 165,000 kilowatt hours a year, which is roughly equivalent to the energy use of about 20 to 25 homes in New Hampshire. So in this case, Effingham Elementary School, this is more energy than they actually use in a year. So they're able to take the school district is able to take the extra credits and credit them monetarily to other bills, other energy bills for another elementary school in their district. Moving on to, one of the cool things about solar on schools is we collect data from the generation from the solar panels, wind speed and wind direction, along with temperature and output of the panels. And so that data allows not only remote operations and maintenance of the system, but it also allows in an educational setting, it allows kids to learn about renewable energy, but also incorporate that into STEM programs where they can graph the output and look and see when a cloud came over and how the power went down. Some really basic things for in an elementary school setting, but as you get into the higher level classes, you can do more interesting observations of what impacts, the energy, the wind speed, cooling the panels down, even though it's a really hot day. So there's all kinds of cool educational aspects. I want to show some examples of residential solar and some pricing, just so people had some rough ideas here. So this is a rooftop system. It's about 11 kilowatts, produces roughly 13,000 kilowatt hours annually, and it's going to cost about $30,000 installed. Now, not everybody has that much electric need, and not everybody has that much money. So you can put in a smaller system. You could put in a system that's a third that size. Or believe it or not, there's a lot of people with what I would consider too much money, and they're putting in systems that are like 100 kilowatts. So, a residential scale system has a full range of size. And again, these are net metered systems. There's no batteries in most cases. Here's another example. You'll notice that both of these are what we use now is all black panels. And these aren't great examples because the roofs aren't black colored. But when you get to more like a situation like this, they blend in a little better than the old style aluminum frame panels. So it's what we're using a lot for residential scale, or like on a live instance. Here's a ground mounted system. That's another way to do it. If you've got a big maple tree in your front yard that shades your roof, and but you have a backyard where you can put solar ground mounted panels, this is another good way to do it. The ground mount is going to cost you a little more, but oftentimes it generates more electricity because you can tilt the panels such that they'll shed snow immediately, where a lot of times rooftop systems will not. Well, here's the point in the presentation where we're going to move on to beneficial electrification. I wanted to see if there's questions that could be answered now. Juno, what do you think? I'll see if I can look at my chat here.
Can I ask a question just following those last slides?
Sure.
Those systems that you pay 30,000 or whatever to put them in, do you have a sense of the cost savings on electric for a year so that people can have an idea of how they start to pay for themselves with our?
Yeah, so the I don't have an example of the cost savings, but what a common payback is nowadays with current electric rates is certainly under 10 years. With commercial scale systems, we're seeing some even lower than that. Because with economies of scale, you can get the price down. But one way of looking at that is that you could, borrow money to pay for the solar energy system, and then you have a monthly payment for that loan. And your electric bill reduction in cost would likely be somewhere similar to that loan payment. And so ideally, you'd have not a lot of out-of-pocket costs as you're paying off that loan. And then when you pay that loan off, you get free energy. I'm not in the solar residential business. Some installers do have different financing that they include. Others do not, but again, you can borrow some of the money from the bank and help pay off your loan that way with energy savings.
And so with commercial systems being lower than the community solar projects sometimes might be more beneficial for a neighborhood or.
Yeah, that's a great question. With the economies of scale, the cost of installing is lower. So ideally, a community solar project where you were able to buy into a few panels would be a more cost-effective way to do it, but that's not really very well available in New Hampshire yet. I think it will become available. It's a good concept, and it's something that's growing, but it's not something that's here and now.
We have a question too about how long these solar panels last at this time.
Great question. So they're warranted for 25 years. They're expected to last 35 years. And I had a great experience recently where I went to the Society for Protection of New Hampshire Forests Conservation Center in Concord. Many of you may have been there. And that was one of the first projects I ever worked on, and that was put in 25 years ago. There was a date of install on the little kiosk. And so it's kind of cool because it's actually a system that's still producing, still working great. It's 25 years old. Believe it or not, the initial inverters are still working, but typically in a 25-year system, you would plan on replacing the inverter halfway through that life cycle. And inverters are not a huge portion of the cost, so that's not outrageous. The other thing I wanted to point out is one of the great parts about solar electric systems, especially for residential systems, is they really don't require a lot of maintenance. You probably should be checking for squirrel nests and that type of thing, and just making sure wires aren't hanging down from the array. But I have a solar array that's 15 years old, and I don't do anything to it. Every once in a while I go down to make sure the inverter is still flashing, its little lights to make sure it's working, but it's very little maintenance required. And the inverters have no moving parts except for a fan, and it's great.
And they're powered by solar.
That's even better.
There's a question about how you calculate how many panels your installation will need.
Great question. So what we start with is if you're talking about your home or even your business or whatever, you figure out whether there's a budget that you're trying to meet, or whether you're trying to meet the amount of kilowatt hours you use in your house. And so if it's a budget, you say, well, this is roughly what it costs per watt, and then we kind of calculate what the size of the system would be, and then you can calculate how many kilowatt hours are generated from that. And then once you know the kilowatt hours you need, you kind of back calculate how big of a system you would need. Let's say it's 10 kilowatts. And then we determine which size panels we're going to use. If we have those black panels that were shown, those are probably about 400 watts. So it would take 10,000 divided by 400, 10,000 watts of the system size divided by 400 watts of each panel. And that is the number of panels that you would need.
Okay. I think that's the questions for the moment.
Okay, well, we'll have plenty of time at the end, hopefully. So moving on to the next part of the show, which is beneficial electrification. And so it's a cool concept, and I figured I would pull up some definitions. So the first one I got from the NRDC was achieving one or more of three outcomes without adversely affecting any of them: saving customers money over the long term, reducing environmental impacts, and improving public health. And then the third one, which is a little esoteric for most homeowners, which is enhancing power grid operations and reducing associated costs by a better load management. So those are all important, but to bring it down to earth, I think the next description is much more appropriate. So the concept is you're replacing direct fossil fuel use. In the case of a vehicle, you're replacing a gasoline vehicle with an electric vehicle. Or in the case of your home, your lawnmower, you can replace your gas lawnmower with an electric lawnmower. Or you can replace your heating system that uses oil or propane, and you can get rid of those and put in mini split heat pumps, which uses electricity. Now, and there's many opportunities to do this, and I have some other slides that I'm going to talk about. So, but the most important part of this, which is something my wife will remind me always about, is that if you're replacing a gasoline powered engine with an electric vehicle that's powered by coal-fired power plants, you're not really making it's not beneficial electrification, it's just electrification. So the way this is looked at is that you're working on both simultaneously. You're electrifying, or for practical use for a homeowner, you're electrifying your home as you can. Your car gives out, you buy an electric vehicle. Next year, your lawnmower gives out, you buy an electric lawnmower, and in 3 years, your heating system you need to replace your boiler, so you think about converting that to electricity. But at the same time, the grid needs to do a better job of greening up and getting rid of the coal-fired power plants and putting more solar and wind and hydro on the grid, so that the electricity we're using is cleaner. So now you can influence more easily the electrification of your home than you can electrification or greening up of the grid. But there's two things you can do. One is you can put solar on your house and create your own electricity, and you can also talk to your state representatives and make sure they know that you want a greener grid. So here's an example, an image showing, how to the beneficial electrification of your home. What it doesn't show solar panels on the roof, but it shows that you've got your electric vehicle in the driveway and your gas-powered lawnmower, and you've converted your heaven forbid, your gas range to electric, and your hot water system. You can put in there's now heat pump hot water systems. And the hardest conversion probably for most homes is converting like oil or propane baseboard heat to electric. That's a whole nother kettle of fish. But in many cases, people can use mini split heat pumps to heat their homes and at least reduce the amount of oil and propane they use through their old heating systems. So the other thing that I find really cool about this is that I know a number of folks, and it's becoming more and more a thing, that you can size your solar energy system to produce all the electricity you need to run your home and your vehicles and you're creating your own little net zero world. That's that's beneficial electrification at its greatest. But we don't have to all achieve that perfect net zero. We can do it steps at a time as our budget or our or whatever allows us to. So I wanted to bring out a couple other examples of beneficial electrification. The first one is I worked with Star King Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Plymouth, and we were able to put in a 36 kilowatt system that provides all of the energy that's needed for the fellowship. We pulled out 2 old oil boilers and the old oil tank and put in some heat pumps and some electric boilers. And now, after a year of operation, we've shown that we got lucky and calculated the amount of energy used versus the amount of energy that produced, and it's almost exactly the same. So that's a really big win. The other one that I'm in the middle of working on is the Chocorua Lake Science Center, which I'm sure everyone knows. They put in a big wood heating plant recently, and so that heats almost all the buildings on campus, but they still had a pretty big electric load, and now we've just installed a system that covers entirely their electric load with solar panels at the back of and between the 2 parking rows. So next time you go there, you won't be able to miss it. But these are examples of not only homeowners, but sort of commercial and institutional operations that can, show, that proves that we can do this beneficial electrification. So this is the last slide, sort of weaving it all together. The goal, at least from my perspective, and climate change, is to reduce our energy carbon footprint. So the first, most important one is efficiency and conservation. 2 different things. Efficiency is using the energy that you use in the most efficient way you can to get the most out of it. So putting insulation in your home so you use less energy to heat or cool it. Conservation is also important. It's not really talked about much, but it's hugely important. It's the old Jimmy Carter way of putting on your cardigan, or turning down your heat, or not driving as much. So we need to do all of these things. We need to do conservation. We need to use less, drive smaller vehicles. We need to make everything we use more efficient. Converting to electric energy source allows us to have a lower carbon footprint, especially when we work on those, either generating our own electricity or cleaning up the grid. And again, these don't have to be sequential, and they don't all have to happen at the same time. You do what you can, and you're doing your best. The last plug I will make, I already said it, but to clean up the grid, it's not just going to happen. It's, we're just going to sit back and slowly boil. So we need to talk to our representatives and let them know that there's a lot of things that can be done out there, and we need them working hard every day to do it. And finally, I'm a big fan of carbon fee and dividend. It's also called a carbon tax, but it's, if you believe in that, tell your representatives, because it's gonna come. It's kind of the only solution. It's already happening all around us, Europe and Canada, and so that we're going to be forced to live within a carbon tax, and the sooner we adapt to it and adopt it, the better off we're going to be financially and environmentally. So that's all I have. How we doing time?
Thank you very much. We have questions in the chat, and I would also welcome if people would like to raise their hand and ask questions. There's a question about if you buy a fully electric car, how many panels would you need to service it at what cost? Which
Wow,
I'm sure
you're
there's
testing my,
some.
that is a really good question. You would have to calculate, and it's not too hard to do. You'd have to calculate, first of all, you could go online and calculate and say, how many miles do I want to drive in a year? And which vehicle am I using? And how many kilowatt hours that's going to use. So I don't have the answer, but it's something you can do. But you kind of have to start with knowing how many miles you think you want to drive, and you convert that, then convert into kilowatt hours, and then that can convert back to how much larger your solar energy system has to be to produce that much energy.
Peter?
Hi, thanks. I didn't want to jump in front of the chat, but this may not be right for this. Ted, thanks for this information. Really, really helpful. I'm interested in anybody who we're sort of in the woods. And so we've been advised that in order to really get a full solar thing for our house, we got to build a $100,000 barn, get these panels way up in the air. Do you have any examples or projects you've worked on where we haven't tried to take it to zero in terms of our electric bill, but we've tried to, knock off 40% of it with a, suboptimal array, in terms of the quantity of available sunlight? Is there any mathematics that you've worked on that have been just trying to get the cost out a bit?
I'm not sure I quite understand your question, but I'll answer it in a couple ways. It's very rare that a rooftop is perfect for solar, so it's going to collect 100% of what's available. And so you kind of do what you can do. If you put it on a roof and it's got a bunch of shade because there's a bunch of trees, if the cost of that works for you because you're still able to generate some electricity, then go for it. There's nothing that says you can't have a system that's not producing as much as it should. The other thing you can do is, as a good solar installer can evaluate a certain area and tell you exactly how much is going to be lost to shade. We have got several tools that allow us to do that. So you can evaluate different areas of your property and at least conceptualize how much energy could be produced at that area. The other thing that I hate to say, but being involved in commercial projects, we have to cut down trees, and it's a bummer to do a lot of times. It makes me sad, but on the other hand, I'm pretty convinced that the net benefit is much greater to produce solar energy for 25 years than to tend to worry about a few trees. So especially big white pine trees that fall on people's houses anyway. So
Thank you.
sure.
There's a question, what about battery backup? I guess tending toward home systems.
Yeah, sure. So there are a number of options out there, and I don't install residential solar anymore, but when I talk to the guys who do, the answer usually is, do you really need it or do you really want it? So if you lived in a house that lost power a lot, every month or something, battery backup may be a good thing. But you also have to understand that if you use a lot of electricity, if you use like 10,000 kilowatt hours a year, you're not going to be able to get a battery backup system that powers your entire house, because you use a lot of electricity unless you spend a whole heck of a lot of money. So oftentimes, if somebody has to have all their electricity when the power goes out, the best solution is probably a generator, because where I live, we lose power like once a year practically. I mean, it's not that bad. So sort of depends on how much power you lose, or how often you lose it, and for how long, and what critical loads you have. You may have a freezer that's got important stuff in it, or you may have some medical equipment that you got to run. And in that case, then you probably want a battery backup system and a generator. You want belts and suspenders. So the other thing I'll say is that battery technology is, it's kind of like laptops. You know, if you bought a laptop 10 years ago, the one you have now is way better and way less expensive. And same with these things. So if you don't need to buy a battery now, you might want to wait a couple years. If you're an early adopter, go for it. It'll be cool to have. There's Tesla Powerwalls. There's a bunch of others out there, but they're not without their problems. And it's not necessary for most people.
Russ?
You're on mute, Russ.
Okay, you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Hi,
great.
Russ.
I'm not sure you mentioned RECs with regards to residential systems. Renewable energy credits.
Yeah. Okay, well, renewable energy credits are a way that you can sell the environmental values of the solar energy you generate. And so you can, if your system generates whatever it generates, you can sell them for about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Technically, and there's people that differ on this, you're selling your environmental attributes. So you're selling them to someone else who's going to say, hey, I just bought this wreck. Now I'm green, which means you're not as green. So from a residential standpoint, I think that some people are selling their wrecks, some people aren't. Same with the commercial side of things. But technically, in my opinion, if you sell your wrecks, you're selling your environmental attributes. So but it is a way for you to get some income and reduce the cost of your system. So you might do that and say, okay, I'm going to sell my wrecks for 5 years and that'll help me pay it off, and then I'll stop selling them and I'll feel greener. So
what do you mean by selling your environmental attributes? Could you say more about that?
sure. So every kilowatt hour you generate is there's an environmental attribute associated with that. So if your system generates 10,000 kilowatt hours in a year, and you can sell that for 3 cents, that's what, $300 a year of environmental attributes that someone will buy. A business, let's say there's a business that has either green goals or wants to be green, they can buy those and say, hey, we're 100% solar or green clean energy, even though they don't produce any energy themselves, because they bought these renewable energy credits.
Point there is that RECs, when they started, were pretty lucrative. In Massachusetts, they were like $300 or something. Now they're down to about $15 a piece because there are more people going solar and there are more businesses cleaning up their act. So the RECs, in effect, are going to phase themselves out over time. Comment on having a full electric car in this environment. We looked this over. We have a plug-in hybrid. We had it 3 months. When my wife asked, "What's that noise?" I said, "It's the engine." We most of our driving is right around the valley. We have an 11 kilowatt system, and most months our electric bill is $13. The last one jumped up for several reasons. My daughter's plants that she's starting to grow, and some other reasons. But a plug-in hybrid is a good deal in this part of the country as a transition vehicle. I'd also remind people that the newest Green Energy Times is at Hannaford's, though I'm having trouble keeping them in because I've told too many people and they disappear. I have to keep filling the thing back up again. There's a lot of information in there on all aspects of solar, and it's free. It's also available online for free. So
Yeah, and we linked to it in the resources for the program earlier in the month, and so we can link to that again.
Yep, good.
There's a question, as you suggest, the first step is always a home energy audit and weatherizing as much as possible. How much of an impact can home efficiency have on system size design from your experience?
I would only have to guess. My guess is that if you did it really depends. If you've got the old farmhouse that's a leaky sieve and you're spewing out energy, and then you do a massive retrofit, you probably can reduce 40% of your energy costs. But many of us have already updated a lot of our efficiency, and there's little tweaks we can do, but not massive ones. So it kind of starts with, it kind of depends on what you're starting with. And it also depends on how much conservation you add to that efficiency. Conscious conservation can really reduce your use of electricity. Phantom loads leaving on your TV is sucking energy, even though it's turned off all the time. There's all kinds of things that you can go after. So it depends on how hard you work.
A reminder about those phantom loads. Each of the libraries in the area has a kilowatt meter that you can check and see how great your phantom loads are. I believe every library has one or two. The Gibson Center has a couple. They're free to take, and you plug in and see how much each of these phantom loads, or anything else, like your refrigerator, if it's 25 years old, you probably find out it'll be a lot cheaper to replace it than it will to keep putting electricity through it. So called a kilowatt meter. So
I was gonna,
a little bigger than a cell phone.
yeah, I was gonna say, I'm quite sure the Cook Library has those, for those of you who are in Tamworth. There is a question. I have a 2010 system that just quit last summer. The batteries are gone, and I've been told it will cost more than $20,000 to replace them. Is there a better system? I don't know if you would need more information to answer that.
Probably. It sounds like it might be an off-grid system, or batteries are, that's one of the downsides of batteries, especially the old style batteries and off-grid, is when they go, they cost a heck of a lot of money to replace. So, if you're, off-grid systems are kind of a whole nother animal, but if you're connected to the grid, what you should really think about is whether you need the batteries or not.
Can you give a sense of how much that Effingham School project cost?
No, sir. No, that's, I'm sure it's public information. I'm trying to remember whether it's a power purchase agreement. I don't remember. So let me talk about that real quick. One way for a school to buy solar energy is to allow a third party to put the system in, and then just buy the electricity that's being generated from it through a power purchase agreement. And we've done that with a number of schools. The Profile School up in Bethlehem is a good example of a recent project we just did. So they didn't have to put out any money at all. They just buy the electricity that's generated from the project. The Effingham Elementary School project probably would cost, if you put it in yourself, about $280,000 to $300,000. So a little over $2 a watt for a system of that scale.
The Madison Town array is a power purchase agreement through revision, and we have some figures on how exceptionally well that array is serving the town of Madison. That's been in for 3 years.
So thanks, Russ. That's a good point. And it reminded me of another interesting thing that's happened in the industry, which is even only 2 years ago, a power purchase agreement was a really good thing for a town or a school to do, because they can't take the tax credit. And the tax credit a homeowner can take, which is 30%, a business can take. It's 30% tax credit. It's a lot of money. It's a big chunk of the system. But a not-for-profit cannot take the tax credit. So power purchase agreements were developed because a third party, a developer, can take the tax credit, build the system, sell the energy to the end user, the school or business or whatever, at a discount, and everybody wins. But what's happened recently at the same time is bank borrowing rates have gone up significantly, which makes the cost of borrowing money for that third party way more expensive. And at the same time, the Inflation Reduction Act has a clause now that allows nonprofits to get a direct payment of that 30% tax credit to the nonprofit. And so all of a sudden, the prospect of a PPA becomes not as attractive. So for instance, we're working with towns now. The town of Plymouth is about to vote on a warrant article to own their own array, because they're going to be able to get that 30% direct pay and borrow their own money at municipal rates, which are cheaper than a third party LLC can get. And so all of a sudden, power purchase agreements, which were the sort of obvious choice, are not necessarily the obvious choice for towns or schools to own solar arrays.
Right, and so schools fall under that as well.
Correct.
Schools can get that credit.
There's still power purchase agreements are a lot easier because they don't have to borrow money, they don't have to own the system and all that. But it's just sort of an interesting new twist on how we finance projects.
Ted?
A quick question on Rex. We installed our array in late 2021, and I've never received any money. Who do I have an issue with? Is it with Eversource, my provider?
Do you have a rec meter?
Yes.
You have to find a.
Well, I went through the whole thing of establishing it and everything, but haven't received any money. So I'm just, who do I pursue?
Somebody has to sell the Rex on your behalf. So you need to
Yes.
find a rec aggregator to do that.
I've done that. So it's the aggregator is the one I want to talk to.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not the utility. There's somebody that's collecting that information that should be able to sell those Recs and get you that.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
And so I think you answered this talking about the 30% tax credit, but that's what's available now to everyone, to every homeowner putting in the system, they can get a 30% tax credit.
That's correct.
And how does that work? They put out the money and then it comes
And
back after.
They get a credit on their next tax return. So you have to have the money to put it out in the first place, but then you get a tax credit.
Mhm. I'm just going to read this one in case not everybody's seeing the chat. On solar panels, we have 18 panels installed in 2017 for $18,000. $1,000 a panel, easy to think about that math. Our net electric costs last year were $530, thanks to our solar panels generating most of our electricity. We got payments from Eversource when we generate more than we use, $521, and renewable energy credits, $275. It powers a full electric vehicle, electric hot tub, and a big old farmhouse.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're hearing the positive stories and not the negative ones.
Anybody else have questions tonight? Ted, thank you so much for all of this. Do you have last words you'd like to share?
No, I really appreciate everybody's interest, and I, think that spread the word, because there's the whole concept of beneficial electrification. The idea that someone can put up enough solar panels to run their entire lives is kind of mind-blowing to me. I've been doing this a long time, and we're at a really amazing point right now where, you know, we can do this. And right now, you're probably going to spend a little more money than leaving it status quo. But I think really soon it's going to just be the obvious choice to do. So it's really quite exciting.
And is the first step for people to find a solar installer, get on their list, because I hear they're busy, and, you know, get an evaluation?
I think that, yeah, thanks, Russ. Green Energy Times is a great resource. It really is. If you just read Green Energy Times, you're going to learn so much more than I can ever tell you. I'm not sure there's a first step. I think, you know, you kind of figure out which one of the three things, you know, efficiency, converting things to electric, and getting solar power at your house. Which one of those excites you the most, or which one can you kind of see yourself taking the first step with? And take the first step and just do it. And then, you know, remember that you can do the other ones simultaneously.
And thank you to Mary. The link for Green Energy Times is in the chat if y'all want to click on it and check it out. Turn your lights off when you leave the room, everybody.
Efficiency and conservation.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much. And thank you all of you for coming and for your interest.
Thank you, Juno, and thanks to the Cook Library.
Yeah. Thanks, Mary, wherever you are out there.
Thanks so much for hosting this.
All right, thanks.
Great job.
You.